Welcome to the show. This is Common Threads. We do this every Thursday night. I'm your host, JD. 2 guests, 1 hour-ish. Welcome to the show for all of you across platforms who have not tuned in. And if you have watched the show before, can't imagine why you're watching again, but I'm very grateful that you are. Down there in the bottom, what is that for you? The bottom right of the screen, you see there, that's a QR code that takes you over to our sponsor. We'll be hearing through that more throughout the hour. And are we telling people to vote in the thing? No, we voted earlier for our special third topic. Yeah, we'll pop it into the chat here for our guests. And so let's meet our guests. Let's bring them in. We got Jim Roberts, former assistant managing editor of the New York Times Cheddar, contributing editor at the 74, longtime legendary deadhead, Jim Roberts. Very excited to have Jim. Also joining the show is Dylan Hausman. Dylan is editor-in-chief at Daily Caller himself. Not a newbie to the music scene. This might accidentally become a music-heavy show. Very grateful for both your times and perspective. Jim, Dylan, welcome.
Thank you, dude.
Of course. So sometimes I like to start the show with a little today in history. This is actually a fun one before we get to the important topics. This is true. Today in history, January 16th, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution prohibiting the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors or beverage purposes is ratified by the requisite number of states. That was January 16th, 1919. Jim and Dylan, not anyone's favorite amendment because we overturned it a handful of years later, but cheers to the 18th Amendment and every other mistake that the U.S. government has made over history.
I'll drink to that, JD.
I could drink that. I'm saving my unmarked beverage because no free ads for later. But yeah, not my favorite.
Fair enough. Drinking is certainly welcome on the show if you got your favorite beer of choice or whiskey of choice or whatever it is. All right, let's dive in here, gentlemen. We got a lot of exciting things to talk about tonight. And by the way, for people watching the show, please sound off in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking. Feel free to ask Jim and Dylan questions. We'll feature your questions. We'll feature your comments so long as they're appropriate. We'll put them up on screen. We'll talk about them here as a group. Guys, let's start with the outgoing president's kind of farewell address. Maybe not quite to the scale of Washington's famous farewell address. I've, for one, have been kind of struck. I've had to remind myself a lot over the last couple months, like Joe Biden is still president. So much of the oxygen has been dominated by Donald Trump, the Trump transition, the Trump tariffs, fill in the blank here, that sometimes I sit there and I'm like, oh yeah, Joseph Robinette Biden. This guy's wanted to be president for like 40 years, was president, is still president. Let's take a listen to what Biden had to say yesterday. Say hi, Taylor. Oops. I don't know if the audience saw Taylor. That's our producer extraordinaire. All right, so Jim and Dylan here. We got Joe Biden talking about misinformation. He says today an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence. He takes aim at the tech industrial complex. Jim, not a very subtle jab at the Musk-Trump alignment. What do you make of what we heard from outgoing President Biden in his final message to the American people?
I was actually a little surprised by the words he chose. I was certainly surprised in how that address sort of kind of came to you as a viewer. I also don't, who were that many people watching this? I mean, be honest. But those who did probably are going on like, when is this going to be over, and, getting a little bored by it. But then, he drops some really heavy duty words. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact checking. What else did he say? The truth is smothered by lies, told for power and profit. Well, there's certainly a lot of truth in what he was saying, and certainly got my attention. Kind of glad he said what he did. The stuff about the oligarchy, I mean, it certainly rang true to me, but it was a little toothless by not mentioning people by name. I mean, if you're gonna talk about Elon Musk, Elon Musk doesn't refrain from using other people's names, you should go ahead and talk about him. But what I thought was really powerful was the final phrase. Now it's your turn to stand guard. Here's Biden talking to the public, presumably those who are listening or watching, saying something is happening and you need to watch out for it. It wasn't a powerful speech. Joe Biden has long ago stopped being a powerful speaker, but I thought those words were quite powerful.
Dylan, how about you? What do you make here? And then obviously, like we had said, right before we played the sound there from the outgoing president, it has been easy to forget at times that there is still a president since the election who is not Donald Trump. But for whatever it's worth, every president on his way out of office has a right to make a final address. Not quite a final shoulda, woulda, coulda here from Joe Biden, but it certainly seems to be some indication of a warning. Dylan, I guess really the question is, at this point, how many people really care? I mean, Donald Trump won 7 of the 7 swing states they know about. They voted for, in many cases, the Elon Musk so-called oligarchic relationship here with the incoming administration. What do you make of what we've heard from either President Biden here down the stretch or any other Democrat in this lame duck transition period?
Yeah, I mean, that last point you made is particularly relevant, I think. This is surprising and unsurprising to me. The reality is, as you said, people know what Donald Trump is. They know who he is. They know what his movement is, and they still voted for him. It wasn't a landslide victory necessarily, but it was a decisive victory. And so I think for Biden to return to this kind of threat to democracy, this is a dark age, America that's being ushered in, and you all need to stand athwart and be prepared for an oligarchy. That's a loaded term, and people can debate how accurate it is or not. But there were 2 Joe Bidens that kind of existed on the campaign trail before he dropped out. Of course, I think one was this Joe Biden, and one was actually I was a great president. We accomplished a ton of things. We passed major legislation, et cetera, et cetera. That was the other Joe Biden, and I kind of expected it to be more of that message, more of trying to cement my legacy as a president, even though it was only 1 term. I think reminding people that you were the president that lost. He didn't literally lose. He wasn't on the ballot, but was on track to lose, and kind of handed the country back over to Trump, and how terrible that is in his view is an interesting way to go out that I maybe wouldn't have gone with myself personally.
We've talked a lot on this show, at least the last couple weeks, about Inauguration Day, which, first of all, the weather looks like it's going to be awful in Washington. This is the first Inauguration Day. I am happy not to be there, standing at the Smithsonian Mall, because it looks like the weather is just going to be absolutely awful. I hope many people do go. I don't know if it's going to be the largest crowd of all time. But Dylan, since I have not gotten to talk to either you or Jim since then, I want to pose to you a question I've asked a few other guests. And Dylan, I'll start with you. If you are a Joe Biden, or if you are Vice President Harris, or any of these Democrats who have painted the picture of the tyranny that a Donald Trump presidency is going to bring. I understand that the inauguration is largely window dressing. But Dylan, how do you square the circle of Democrats who I assume are all still going to be there, and in doing so kind of returning the gesture of favor that Donald Trump denied Joe Biden through his decision not to go to inauguration in January of 2021?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question, right? If it were me, I believe in respecting the office. You go meet with the president, you go to things like this no matter what. But if you're Joe Biden, I think it compounds the error for Democrats. I think it was an error. It proved to be an error to focus so much on the threat to democracy, the Trump's a tyrant messaging. Because again, people know who Trump is. If they weren't convinced by that in the first, 8 years he was on the scene, they weren't going to be convinced, now that you're saying it again. So I think it was a mistake in the campaign to emphasize that as much as they did and go with that messaging. And so now I think it compounds that error when you are now showing up to these things, shaking his hand, meeting with him at the White House, saying we're going to have this, transition of power, we're going to give them everything they need. It kind of compounds that error because it does reveal it to be kind of empty, doesn't it? I mean, if you think this guy is a dictator in waiting and he's going to, usher in an oligarchy and all these things, why are you meeting with him? Why are you being cordial with him? So, it is what I would do personally. I would have the meetings. I would go to the inauguration and all those things. But I think it kind of opens people's eyes up and makes them question, were they lying to us when they were saying all these things about Trump this whole time? Did they really believe that? Or was that just politics as usual? I think it compounds that error.
I mean, Jim, to Dylan's point here, I'm reminded of the funeral services for Jimmy Carter. I think that was only last week. It feels like much longer ago than that.
Yeah.
But the fascinating images we've had, I know a lot of people were frustrated with Obama for appearing as chummy. I don't really know what the alternative is if you're sitting next to the guy, which I guess unless you're kind of doing what I think Vice President Harris did, which even former President Bush did, who just comes in with a little belly tap and kind of ignores Donald Trump. But Jim, I mean, would you understand if Democratic voters are shocked and outraged a bit by watching the Biden and Harrises of the world still show up there to the U.S. Capitol on Monday afternoon and be there in support to at least communicate to the American people, well, hey, we're the party that believes in a peaceful transition of power?
Well, the Democratic Party is the party that believes in a peaceful transition. I think this is something that they have to do. They've made that point over and over again. And to do otherwise would actually call into question everything they have said about that in the ways in which they were so critical of Trump and his allies and how they handled the transition or lack thereof 4 years ago. Also, I think these are people who honor the system. And I'm talking of Biden, Obama, Kamala Harris, the Clintons, the Bushes. They respect the system. They believe in the system. They hope the system survives Donald Trump. But I just feel like their respect for democracy and for the system demands that they attend. Now, looks like Michelle Obama is taking a pass. I think that's her right. I'm not sure that, her absence will be that glaring, although people will notice it and discuss it. But I just feel like for Democrats who are watching this event, they know that this is not a matter of hypocrisy on the Democrats' part. This is not a matter of them saying one thing during the campaign and doing something else on Inauguration Day. This is showing their respect for the system, their respect for democracy.
All right, Jim and Dylan, hang on one second. We're going to hear quickly from our sponsor, and we'll continue this conversation on the other side, specifically dealing with you two as newsroom veterans, the way you are, understanding better the responsibility of the media. What did people get wrong the first term? What can they maybe do a little bit better or prepare themselves for a second term? I'll ask you guys that on the other side. But first here, my friends, if you're serious about investing, you got to know about public.com. It is my personal favorite platform of choice, not just because they sponsor the show, but because genuinely I have a portfolio there and I love it. You can invest in everything: stocks, options, bonds, crypto. They offer some of the highest yields in the industry, like the bond account, which currently has a 6% or higher yield, and it stays locked in even if the Fed cuts rates. Remember, we are expecting perhaps a handful of other cuts here in 2025. What sets Public apart from the rest is how they give you the tools you need to make informed investment decisions. They have a really cool built-in AI tool that's called Alpha. It doesn't just tell you that an asset is moving, it tells you why that asset is moving, gives you better perspective and understanding into what's actually driving the performance of your portfolio. Investing for those who take it seriously, head on over to public.com/CT to learn more. Also scan the fancy QR codes. It's 2025. We got fancy technology. Takes you right there. All right, let's bring in Jim and Dylan back. Jim, to continue with you, I wonder first, I'm going to ask a version of this to both you and Dylan. I think there's a lot of newsroom operations that are sitting there and saying, well, there's a lot we got wrong maybe the first Trump term. There's a lot we got wrong surrounding the election. Clearly, there's this litigated space that kind of happened with the electorate where they said, well, maybe we prefer more independent type of podcasting environments like the conversations we're having relative to more mainstream media outlets. Jim, let me start with you as we all kind of look back to everything we learned between 2016 and 2020. Where do you think many mainstream media newsrooms may have gotten it wrong, and what should they be doing differently or better ahead of a second Trump term?
Okay. JD, you and I maybe we have many things in common, but one thing in common is that we both worked for a business news network. Okay? You still do, if I'm not mistaken. I think the media from 2025 on needs to be better at covering the economy and covering the business world. I really hope that if collectively we've learned anything from the past 4 years or the past 8 years, it's how important this is. I mean, to me, the biggest story of the first few years of Trump 2.0 is going to be the economy. There will be other things to pay attention to. Will the FBI be weaponized and go after political opponents? There's foreign policy issues, but the media has to pay acute attention to what's going on with the economy and how it impacts the public. Why am I saying this? Not because we used to work for a business news network, but for a couple of things. Joe Biden did Donald Trump an enormous favor. He left him, or is leaving him, an economy that's the gold standard of the world. And by all rights, it shouldn't be this good. From Trump's last month in office to Biden's final full month in office, the U.S. saw 12% increase in jobs. Hourly wages rose nearly 20%. No president since Bill Clinton has left his successor with as good an economic picture as what Joe Biden is leaving to Donald Trump. We can thank Jay Powell for some of that, for threading the needle, avoiding a recession. Good for him. But I mean, seriously, compare where we were in January of 2020 to where we are now economically. And this was not clear to the voters. Certainly in the swing states and certainly the industrialized states that really made a difference in the election. People thought the economy was a disaster when it really wasn't. Yeah, we had a couple of years of bad inflation, but where are we now? We're about 3%, likely to hit somewhere 2.5% in the next 12 months. This is just incredible. It's a high wire act that should have really helped Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, whoever wound up being the final nominee, should have helped them retain the White House. The second reason that I think this is the biggest story of the next few years is that there's a great likelihood that Donald Trump is going to muck this up. The economic gains of the past 4 years are not to be trifled with. There's nothing to guarantee that what we've seen, particularly in the last couple of years, will hold beyond that. It requires careful stewardship, and that's not something that Donald Trump is known for. That's not an opinion. I think that's pretty much a clear fact. So let's say Donald Trump launches a trade war. He says tariffs are his favorite word in the dictionary. Is that true? Something like that? So if he really goes after, some blanket global tariff that has the potential to jack up your imported car price by 25%, your washing machine by 25%, the T-shirts that you wear by 25%, that's going to be a disaster for the country. So you can tell I get wound up about this, but I really mean it. I really think that this is a risk. This is the thing that I worry about a lot, because I've just seen how overwhelmingly the past 4 years have gone against the odds and put us in a much better financial position than we should be in.
Jim, this is the ultimate platform. I want people to get wound up. I want to know what Dylan's wound up about, if anything, here, to the point either, and you're welcome to address Jim's comments on the economy, or more directly here, Dylan, those lessons, especially for a reporter or any reporter, managing editor, newsroom president who's sitting there saying, on the cable news side, obviously we're hemorrhaging viewers as media distribution challenges are changing. But Dylan, there is clearly a fundamental crisis of confidence that so many Americans have with the legacy media. I'm throwing that into a very broad bucket. But Dylan, we exist now in this hybrid digital space. You at the Caller, us here on the show, my work with Jim previously. Your thoughts on what the media should be doing differently as we approach a second term. We do have some comments here, by the way. America's economy was growing at the highest rate during the age of tariffs. That's in response to Trump. Then by American-made products. Dylan, what do you think?
I want to put a pin in one thing you said at the beginning of this segment, which was that it does seem like a lot of newsroom operations are learning lessons or reflecting at least on what they might need to do differently. We can maybe circle back to that because I would point to the Washington Post as an example that maybe they aren't. I think the fact that so much of the staff there and some other places that are trying to make some changes is very frustrated and angry about said changes, I think shows that there's actually still there's a lot of tension still between at least management and actual newsroom people over what changes should be made. And there is some resistance to learning lessons, I think. But to go to what Jim said, I actually think this is a great example of kind of where this problem stems from. And I'm not, full disclosure, I've not been a business reporter. My beat was foreign policy, so it's not in healthcare, so it's not my area of expertise. So I'm, deferring to you guys on that with your backgrounds to some degree. But I think, when it comes to the economy question, there are a lot of economic indicators that were positive as we got closer and closer to the election. There were a lot of numbers that looked good on paper, and people didn't feel like the economy was good. And there can be a debate over why that's the case. Are people just delusional about the economy and about their economic situation? Are they reading too much negative news about it? That seemed to be the prevailing theory of a lot of the media and the Democrats, was basically that people are just reading too much negative news and it's coloring their views. But I mean, speaking, I'm 27 years old. I make a good living as someone that's, an editor-in-chief at a sizable news company. Better than most 27-year-olds in this country do. And I'm years and years away from realistically being able to do something like buy a house, being able to, rent a nice car, buy a super nice car with my own money. There are a lot of things that, I think young people particularly look at their parents and their grandparents as having been able to do and pursue the American dream. And, I can look at numbers on a spreadsheet if I'm, a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old, office worker making 70 grand a year, and I can see, the GDP's growing, unemployment's low, all these various factors. But if I'm 15 years from being able to buy a house and I'm, not going to be able to afford to have as many kids as I want, I think there's a disconnect there. And I don't pretend to know what the answer is necessarily, because I take Jim's point that, again, there are a lot of these macroeconomic indicators that were stronger than people might think. But if it's not trickling down to what people view their own situation as, I think this habit that I think some Democrats and some media members got into during the election cycle of seeming to lecture people that actually the economy is good, you're wrong. You think it's bad and you think you're struggling, but you're not. I think that makes this whole problem of media distrust way worse. And again, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that disconnect there needs to be reflected on a little bit. As opposed to just going full steam ahead with, the economy is good and the numbers are good, so that's that.
I don't disagree at all with what you're saying, Dylan. I also think, though, that some of the opposite occurred quite a bit as well, which was certain news outlets just declaring over and over and over again, without much substance whatsoever to back it up, that the economy was a disaster and that it was Joe Biden who was doing all of the damage to it. I wouldn't call that to be, responsible reporting, but I do think you are absolutely right that the plight of a lot of people is ignored in this, it's ignored by the news media, it's ignored by politics. The inability of young people to forget about owning a home, dreaming about owning a home. You can't even do that. You can't even dream because it's not realistic. That is a tragedy in my mind. And I think it's, like you, I don't have the answer. I don't know what needs to be done to make it possible for young people to do this. But yes, some things are fundamentally wrong, and whether it is the news media establishment or the political establishment, this has got to be something that is discussed. And I'll also say, in my criticism and in what I hope the news media will get better at is seeing these nuances and explaining these nuances and looking at unique voting blocks. the Dylan block, whatever, 27 years old, has a good job, wants to buy a house, but forget about it. Ain't happening. I mean, there are a lot of people like you, I'm certain. And for the media and for politicians, they need to understand better, do a better job of reaching these people. And in the case of the media, telling their stories.
You both very, really good. And I think kind of what I don't often ask questions that like I want to answer necessarily. I want to hear what you all have to think. But I've come up with now my own, because I'm inspired by a hybrid answer of both of yours, what my own answer would be here. And a lot of it is just business news literacy. And I don't mean that on the average American. I don't expect the average American to know the difference between consumer price index or wholesale or producer price index or wholesale inflation numbers. I don't expect the average American to understand the nuances of budget reconciliation on Capitol Hill. Business news programming is by and large made and distributed for a very wealthy and a very knowledgeable investor base. It is people who already have rock and rollin' 401ks and a fat portfolio who wants to know, all right, what does this Friday's PCE number mean for Jerome Powell and interest rates and the pressure on the Magnificent Seven, and what does that do for XYZ? And I think what happens far too often is that most other newsrooms sort of see that reporting and they parrot that reporting in their own headlines. So it becomes very easy for anyone who sits there, who's a headline news writer, who's an editor, to say, oh, well, inflation came in under expectation, without ever giving the average American viewer or voter the context to say, well, falling inflation is great, but falling inflation doesn't mean that prices are falling. It means the rate at which prices are going up is coming down. So I think it's very easy to have too many things be true at once, that the big overarching economy is in incredibly resilient, strong positioning, to Jim's point, relative especially to the rest of the world. At the same time, the average American is sitting there saying, wait a minute, I spend this on rent, I spend this on groceries, I spend this on gas, and you're trying to look at me in the straight face and tell me that I'm really supposed to care about GDP? So that would actually be kind of my answer. Again, I didn't think I was going to weigh in here.
I think that's a good one.
Yeah, but I wish things like that were sort of framed better and that context were given more appropriately, so the average person who is watching the evening news doesn't have to sit there and say, oh, wow, the Dow Jones went up 35 points today or 300 points today. What does that matter to me? What is that? I don't remotely care, nor do I even know what the Dow Jones really is. I could see a lot of Americans saying something like that, Jim.
I agree. And, I don't watch the main network news broadcasts anymore. Probably should, but
most people don't.
I'm not one of those. I am not one of those news consumers. But I do read the mainstream press, not on paper, but it's interesting to me too in that regard, because they treat business news. Well, they have a section. There's a section in the back. It's not front page news. And when it is these moments when the GDP, goes up or down. Those are deemed to be big moments. Or, the latest inflation numbers or something like that. But you're right. It's not put into a context that people can identify with, that relates to their lives, and that explains things to them. Which again brings me back to my original point, that I really, really hope that going forward, the media can do a better job talking to people, knowing their stories, conveying their stories, but also converting that into reporting that they can understand better.
Dylan, how are you either, and you don't have to answer specifically about kind of your role at the Daily Caller if that's not something you're comfortable doing. I'm not going to ask you to speak on behalf of the newsroom, but you're kind of your own personal approach to where we're at in the state and fight against disinformation. Something I've talked a lot about here on the show are my personal frustrations with this new version of Twitter. Not the go buy your check mark type of thing, but I feel like it is so easy. It is easier than ever to have misinformation gets put out. And this was something, this one here, Taylor flagged, is this bit from Joe Rogan where the information is just not quite correct about funding and money that we went. This is a debunked claim. The U.S. has not sent $6 billion to Ukraine by accident. But Dylan, this is something that was spread widely, of course, by the man who now owns Twitter, Elon Musk. And I'm sitting there being like, all right, we're supposed to get community notes to correct these things. Community notes take like 72 hours to pop up if they pop up at all. And Dylan, I sit there as informed a news consumer as I like to think that I am, and I have a hard time separating what's real and what's not. Dylan, how are we supposed to navigate this in this new look world where I want everyone to have a voice? I want everyone to have a microphone to be able to create a show like this and have a conversation. I don't want to put up a walled garden around our national political dialogue, but I feel like, Dylan, there's a little bit, dare I say, don't come after me in the comments, people, but a little bit of a double-edged sword there when it's easier than ever for things that just aren't real to go viral and influence minds.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a huge topic. I'll preface it, what I'm going to say, I'm going to choose my words carefully. Obviously, especially as a news organization, people, just random people on Twitter, or even, independent, singular media figures like Joe Rogan, it's kind of different than if you're running a media company or a news company. So obviously telling the truth and being factually accurate to the best of your ability and fact checking things and your reporting is all super critical, and any responsible news organization or reporter or independent media figure, whoever, should be doing those things. So I don't want to diminish, the importance of that and the importance of all of us living in reality where things are true and correct, and we are operating from a shared fact base, essentially. But this obsession with misinformation, I think, is something the media seems to care a lot about. And I think the culture and regular people have really moved on from to a large degree. People don't want to consume misinformation or fake news. People want to consume things that are real. People aren't always the best arbiters. If they see some random tweet like the one that you guys just showed, aren't always the best arbiter of what is real or not. But I think, the media has to adapt to the fact that the environment we're in, you can't constrain misinformation. It's just not possible. Because if you restrict what people are seeing, if you try to put, flags on all the posts they're seeing, if you try to fact check everything in their face and tell them they're wrong, they're just going to go somewhere else. They're going to go to, more extreme silos of information that are potentially just posting, complete, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on here, I'll just say BS, but are just posting complete BS on their platforms, because people are going to seek out, in the current media environment, the media that they want. They're going to look for the people telling them what they want to hear to a large degree, and that's just the reality we're living in. So I think media can either accept that that's the reality we're living in and say, okay, devoting billions of dollars or millions of dollars or whatever to fact check apparatuses and to flagging systems and to censoring posts is something we want to do in this, in my opinion, futile effort to correct the record of what everybody's saying. Or we can recognize that's just not possible and accept the fact that that's not where people are at and meet them where they are. And another point I would make super important and that often gets overlooked here, there's not really, save a few issues where, we know the sky is blue, we know gravity is real, we know certain things. In the current political environment especially, you can twist facts, you can twist information that is true in just about any direction you want. And so the idea that any entity, be it a Facebook or the New York Times or some executive at some fact-checking organization or any entity or individual can be an arbiter with certainty of what's true or not, I think is a little bit delusional. I mean, I encountered this, I was a healthcare reporter during COVID, and there was so much, fake news flying around during COVID about, various treatments or where did the virus come from. But, we saw the idea that COVID might have come from China in this lab, and there might have been a lab accident or something that released the pandemic on the world. That was deemed misinformation. People were getting posts deleted. People were getting censored over it. And it's turned out to now where you have intelligence agencies in the U.S. government saying, yeah, actually, that's a pretty plausible theory. We think that might be what happened. But because people who were in charge of certain platforms were so certain that it was not true at the time when it was first breaking out, that is a great example, in my opinion, is great evidence of the fact that a lot of this stuff is too complicated for somebody to come down from on high and say, this is true, this is not true, so I'm going to be the arbiter and censor people or put flags on posts or anything like that. And it's not an ideal situation to be in, that a lot of fake news and misinformation can run wild on the internet. But I think that's what's going to happen whether we want it to or not. It's not a fixable problem, really. And a lot of the attempts to fix it do more harm than good by silencing people and shutting down debate and discourse.
Outstanding answer from both of you. Dylan, I really appreciate that perspective. Jim, I'm going to kick this to you because, oh man, are we cooking? I got thoughts on this. Okay, Travel for Business says, nearly all major media outlets are owned by a few major players who easily influence what to report, what not to report, and how to report things. I do not disagree. I am inherently very skeptical. As much as I appreciate the financial markets, and like in Wall Street, we love the merger and acquisition space. We love it. And we are going to be, the perception right now in the street is we are going to be cooking with the merger and acquisition conversation under a second Trump term. But to me, Jim, this idea of consolidated newsroom power, and we got all these messy disputes over distribution right now, everything from regional sports operators, fighting with the cable companies, something we're battling here in New York with Optimum and MSG. It's all part of the same issue, is that if you allow aggressive M&A activity and fewer people at the top, it gets easier to sort of control what gets said, what doesn't get said, and I don't know that gets better necessarily if we do hit a regulatory environment that's very light touch from a federal government that doesn't seek to block those proposed mergers. Because Jim, as things get more expensive, these companies want to merge with one another. They want to acquire smaller companies. I don't begrudge them for that. That's smart business. I just don't know, Jim, if that's best for a news consumer. What would you say in terms of how to earn back some of the trust that has been lost, if it's even possible?
I don't know that it is. Well, actually, I'm not sure it's as bad as you say in terms of completely loss of trust. I find it interesting. Donald Trump loves legacy media. He lives for interviews. He reads. He reads the New York Times. I don't know how much he reads, but he pays attention. He cares about this. And I think a lot of people still do care about getting their news from trusted sources. So I'm not sure that the crisis is quite as big. What I worry more about is the loss of outlets, is the loss of diversity, and particularly on the local level, where, as you know, many cities, no longer have a bona fide news organization, representing and reporting to the public there. So, mergers, acquisitions in that kind of environment are inevitable. And, in some ways, I believe that having any kind of, representation in a local market, any kind of news media, is better than nothing. So, there could be worse things to happen than consolidation and that kind of thing. But I if I'm worried about anything, it's the media companies that are disappearing. And I'm also worried that, okay, we talk about like some really, really big players, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the LA Times. There was a period in which you could pretty much turn to one of those four and feel pretty confident. Even with the, Murdoch's ownership of the Wall Street Journal, you could turn to one of those four and feel like you're getting a relatively straight approach to the news. You may not agree with everything that they say, but you could be pretty certain that it was it was portraying news to a certain level of standards. Well, I think two of those papers are compromised now, or at least I don't know whether we can fully trust what's going on at the LA Times or the Washington Post. Hope we can, but I'm just not certain from what we've seen recently.
Can I ask what makes you, about the Washington Post, what makes you say that they can't be trusted? Because I'm fascinated by this whole debate and situation, because I think deciding not to endorse a candidate was the correct decision. I think it's silly and out of step, out of time that papers did that and do that. There's been other stuff Bezos has been doing, and people can quibble about this or that. But I think, I'm just curious your take, why you think you question if the WAPO can be trusted anymore based on what's going on.
Well, I don't disagree with you about the value of an endorsement or the lack thereof. I don't disagree with that at all. But that wasn't, in my mind, the reason they did not endorse. That was not the reason. You can You can believe me. You can believe Jeff Bezos. It doesn't matter to me. But I don't believe that was the reason. I believe that was a decision with an excuse attached to it. So I think I don't want to go so far as to say I don't trust the Washington Post. I guess I'm at the point where I'm questioning whether I can, and questioning the degree to which we'll see Bezos' thumb on the scale going forward. I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating to watch the billionaire bros. I'm gonna lazily throw them into one pile. I mean, I get it. The go down to Mar-a-Lago and go kiss the ring, give $1 million to the inaugural committee. You want to avoid the worst of winding up on the negative side of a Trump tweet. Companies like Caterpillar and Boeing had to find that out the hard way. And I remember, and we've said this on the show before, I remember when I covered the Trump White House, that during the whole tit for tat, remember the whole tariff thing, Washington, Beijing, back and forth, that there was one man, one champion for his shareholders who emerged, and conveniently his company, who earns a tremendous sum of revenue out of China, by the way, was magically able to avoid the absolute worst of the tariff tit for tat. And it's the guy who makes my iPhone. It's Tim Cook. Remember the whole Tim Apple thing? The reason Trump called him, not the reason he called him Tim Apple, but the famous Tim Apple-ism was this business event he did. I think it was we were in the East Room, and he kind of slips, but the whole thing's amazing to me because there's really no other business leaders just down there. It's the fact that Tim Cook managed that cozy relationship, and I think a lot of other business leaders, Bezos, Pichai, certainly Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg was laying the ground for this for a while, right? After the assassination attempt in Butler, Zuckerberg pretty quick to come out saying, that's one of the most badass things I've ever seen. He's been laying the groundwork to take apart the DEI stuff, to latch himself onto the Trump train. And I'm sure, Dylan and Jim, that had Vice President Harris won this election, there would just be a different tone and temperature from all these billionaires who, of course, like we said, they are very merger and acquisition trigger happy. If you're Zuckerberg, you're going to scoop up the competition. If you're Bezos, you're going to scoop up the competition. Same for any of these companies. And that is a fascinating dynamic, I think, here to watch, fellas. To watch all of the billionaire guys who own this, they own that, they own everything we make, all the software we use. Mark Benioff at Time Magazine and Salesforce, that's another one that comes to mind. All lining up because no one wants to piss off the big guy, right?
Yeah, it's they seem to have learned a lesson that I think keen observers learned long ago, but a lot of people still don't seem to understand, at least in the political sphere, that Trump really just wants to be seen as a deal maker. He just wants to be seen as flattery is the way to get to him, and he wants to be seen as cutting deals with important and rich people and powerful people. So it's smart on their part, but I think it also what you said there about the fact that if Kamala Harris had won, they'd be doing the same thing in the other direction. That's why Joe Biden's oligarchy, tech bro, right wing, Death Star warning, kind of fell a little bit flat to me because these people are not. Look at what's happening with Mark Zuckerberg. Conservatives by and large are not looking at Mark Zuckerberg and thinking, "Wow, we've converted a true believer." People are bashing him, saying, "You treated us like crap for years, and now the Trump one, you're just flipping on a dime." Like people are aware largely of what they're doing here, and I think it's a bipartisan problem. It's not, if Democrats had won, they'd be doing the same thing the other direction. It's a long-standing problem. It's not new either. That was the other thing that bothered me about the address. This is not a new development. Joe Biden gave a billionaire the highest civilian honor with the presidential medal last week to George Soros. So, the idea that it's a right-wing billionaire cabal going on. No, it's a politicians and billionaires cabal that is happening and exists. And this problem is bipartisan. And it's not new.
I'm not mad at that. Jim, final thoughts here before we take our final ad break here. Before our final
when you talk about the tech bros and their embrace of Trump kissing the ring and all, the part that really surprised me was the ABC capitulation, right?
Yeah.
To cave in such a manner, leaving George Stephanopoulos out to dry. That one, I did not see that one coming. And maybe Disney, maybe the corporate powers are going to benefit in some way in the long run, but that just struck me as sheer cowardice. That didn't seem like, okay, I'm just going to put my chips where the smart money is going. This just seemed like, okay, we're putting our tail between our legs and walking away.
Yeah, that was shocking to me. I'm also surprised that George said what he did. I feel like if you're a seasoned journalist, you know to be careful. I mean, we don't have to get too into the weeds here, but this was litigated before a jury. Like, it doesn't, if you've been in a newsroom for a long time, you know what to say, what not to say, you know words to use that protect yourself. I was always surprised. I felt like George repeatedly got it wrong. But the defamation, to Jim's point, I don't disagree with. I thought it was capitulation. I understand why. Again, you're trying to play the game.
It came so early in the process.
It did.
Do we think that ABC didn't want the process to go too much further? I mean, I don't know if you guys have been following this CNN case that's going on with them, this $1 billion case they're a part of. But, they're in a really tough spot because of the fact that, they had messages and internal communications uncovered showing that they, had actual malice. For those at home that don't know, it means you actively knew you were trying to, you wanted to wreck this guy. You wanted to say false things about him and damage him. And CNN, their comms got included into this case, and now they're facing, a potentially way bigger, payment than ABC had to face. So, I mean, maybe it's capitulation. Maybe ABC didn't want more snooping going on into how this whole process came about and what was going on. That's speculative on my part, obviously. Mm-hmm. But, $15 million, or I believe that was the judgment, right, or the settlement they had. That's chump change to Disney, and maybe that's worth not going down this rabbit hole any further of what people on Stephanopoulos' show weren't saying or doing around this whole situation.
Yeah, it's chump change, but in the media you cannot sort of open the door to more legal action. And I think that what they, by caving as easily as they did, they're telling any potentially aggrieved party, hey, come on, file your suits. You're not going to get much resistance from us.
Real quick programming note. We got a lot of viewers right now across platforms. I am so grateful to each and every one of you who's watching the show. Dylan, Jim, programming note. Can I hold you a few extra minutes? Do you have hard outs at 8 o'clock, or can I hold you like 10 after?
10 after.
I'm good.
Good. We're cooking with it. Woo! Okay, great. Then we're going to say, you're good in the back? We got a live studio audience here today. I'll make sure they can hang out as well. Yeah, the Disney thing, I mean, that was a lights out show so far. So I think the thing with, and obviously if you're Disney or anyone else, Disney's also trigger happy on the M&A space. They got this whole thing they're trying to do with, with Fox and Hulu and Warner Brothers Discovery for Venue Sports, and they go and they buy out Fubo. And so that's obviously a regulatory deal that they're not going to pass if Harris wins the administration. But Trump wins, they get the settlement. They strike a deal with Fubo, which is the most dramatic legal turn that story could take. So we're going to have a lot of cases like that. We're going to be hearing about a lot of lobbying trips. Not to mention, I think we're going to be hearing the word emolument. Remember the whole emoluments thing many years ago? We're back. All Americans are going to learn once again in the next 90 days the emoluments clause. It's going to be so front and center. Who's staying at this hotel to get this favor? Who's meeting with that person and that advisor? And I'm not saying a lot of this has not always gone on to various degrees. I just feel like it just seems a lot more pronounced under a Trump presidency. Jim and Dylan, hang on one more second. Wait, do we have to hear from the ad partner one more time? Yes, we do. Okay, they keep the lights on. Well, I didn't keep this light on, but we do have to hear from our friends over at Public. Jim and Dylan, hang on. We'll be right with you guys. All right, folks, if you're serious about investing, you got to know about public.com. Scan the QR code to learn more. You can invest in anything, stocks, options, bonds, crypto, you name it, they got it. They even offer some of the highest yields in the industry, like the bond account, 6% or higher yield. It remains locked in even as Jerome Powell and his colleagues at the FOMC cut interest rates. Remember, we got a pretty good couple of really good inflation prints here the last couple of days. So you got kind of bullish optimism back on the street. Could be in for a few more rate cuts, kind of alleviate those borrowing costs. If that happens, you stand to benefit if you scan the QR code because of those locked-in rates. What sets Public apart from the rest is how they give you the tools you need to make informed investment decisions. It's all about becoming a more informed investor. Or for the purpose of our show, a more informed viewer or voter. That's what it's all about. Public's got a built-in AI tool. It's called Alpha. It doesn't just tell you if an asset's moving, it tells you why. You can actually understand what is driving the performance of your portfolio. It's investing for people who take it seriously. If you're a seasoned investor, maybe you're just trying to get your feet warm a little bit, you want to dip your toes in the pool of investing, trying to figure out this from that, scan over at Public, learn more, public.com/CT to learn more. All right, Dylan, Jim, let's wrap up this conversation here on media, because I didn't want to aggressively cut you guys off here. But Jim, here, any final thoughts on the media? And I've been looking forward to this conversation with both of you being newsroom vets the way you are, but different platforms. And obviously, I think people like Dylan today are dealing with distribution that looks a lot different, Jim, than even when you and I worked together, 5-6 years ago. But Jim, this is no small task, I think, for media, either on the confidence side or even at the very basics, to try and figure out how do you reach people. The tectonic plates are shifting beneath our feet. We go to this app, that app might get banned. Now where do we go next? And the whole time, Jim, they're just trying to get people to read their reporting. I know.
Well, if you go back to the title of your of the show, will SMSM survive Trump's second term? Well, I don't think that's the biggest threat to the media is a second Donald Trump term. I just think there are so many. You mentioned tectonic forces. They're out there. They've been pushing at whether it's, I'm not even sure what the mainstream media really is, but just let's say that they've been pushing at the media with various, waves of disruption for now 25 years. It's not getting any easier. And you're right, JD, the environment in which you and I worked at Cheddar 5-7 years ago is vastly different from what it is now. And arguably, it's harder now to reach people, to keep their attention, and to monetize it. So, which is why it's good for you to be paying your bills, doing those spots for Public. I get it. It's the economics of the news media will always be difficult, and they will probably be more difficult tomorrow than they are today.
Dylan, final word on this to you before we move on.
Yeah, I think kind of along the lines of what Jim was saying, but the threat to the mainstream media is not Donald Trump. There are a few things that have been as good for the mainstream media as Donald Trump. The amount of interest that we've had in politics and news and current events, has been higher under Donald Trump's, era of politics than previously, in my opinion. And the fact that he's president is not a threat to mainstream media. The fact that nobody wants to read mainstream media and watch mainstream media is the threat to mainstream media. The fact that they can't connect with their audience, the fact that they had audience capture for decades where people could only read them and only listen to them and only watch them is the threat. And now they don't have that. That's what the threat to mainstream media is. It's not the fact that Donald Trump is president. If anything, Donald Trump becoming president again, in my view, poses an opportunity for mainstream media that they could try to learn from some of the mistakes they made the first time around, make some adjustments, try some new things, cover him in a different way than they did the first time, which obviously didn't work on multiple fronts. If they wanted to keep him out of office again, it failed in that sense. So I think it can be an opportunity for them, but the problems that threaten mainstream media are financial. They're in terms of distribution, in terms of connecting with the audience, building a brand that people actually trust and don't think is just feeding them nonsense all the time. It's not that Donald Trump is president. It needs to be more inward looking if they want to solve their problems. And I don't know if they can because they don't have that audience capture anymore.
Yeah, and it's really difficult, and I watch Elon Musk on a daily basis. I mean, Jim, he goes after the New York Times with such anger and such and you listen, every newsroom makes mistakes. It happens from time to time. Newsrooms are being run and written for by human beings. I also think, again, to a general, not just business news literacy, a general news literacy, I wouldn't expect the average American to understand the difference between the op-ed section and fact-based journalism, to understand that a newspaper as an offer has people on staff intentionally who are there to give you an opinionated point of view to help shape the context. And then they got a whole lot of staffers. They are just doing the Lord's work. They are collecting facts. They are talking to sources. For the love of God, don't be mad at reporters or journalists from any outlet. And that cuts both ways. I'm not just saying that to defend more liberal-leaning outlets. I've said for a long time, I think Fox News has genuinely some of the greatest Capitol Hill reporters and some of the greatest foreign policy reporters, like my buddy Trey Yingst, that exist in any newsroom. And it's not fair necessarily to conflate you got so many great good faith journalists doing the work, and then for good or for bad, they tend to get conflated with the opinion host and the people who say this and this in the world. And Jim, it's a messy space. But Jim, go ahead, final on this before we move on.
Well, I was just going to say, in what I said a minute ago about, what exactly is the mainstream media? I mean, how do you define it? Is it just, if you think it is, it is. But I think a lot of the critics of the mainstream media are probably going to, by default, say things like the New York Times or the Washington Post. They're gonna equate mainstream with liberal, and I think we need to remember that's not the case. I mean, Fox News is very much part of the mainstream media. I don't think many of the critics of the so-called mainstream media would concede that, because a lot of them are on the right. But I mean, Fox has headquarters in New York. It has, billion-dollar budget, or it has a lot of money at its disposal. It has, as you just mentioned, renowned journalists covering the important stories of Washington. So I think there should be a little bit of care in talking about, or being more specific, if we will, in trying to define what mainstream media is. If you're talking about just the New York Times, well, they'll do just fine. I don't know about MSNBC. If you consider them, are they part of the mainstream media? I don't know, but I just think ever since I saw the title of the show, these thoughts have been percolating in my brain.
One last point, real quick, just because it's related to what Jim said, is I think the term corporate media, I prefer the term corporate media to mainstream media. And we made the stylistic move to switch to that a few years ago with Caller. We mostly use corporate media instead, because that is what binds places like Fox and CNN together, even though they're not ideologically the same. That's something that binds places like that together in a way that I think Jim was speaking to there. So I think that's a little bit more accurate in terms of a lot of these ones.
I agree.
I like that, because it's not so much Fox and MSNBC, then it becomes you're litigating the case a little bit more against News Corp and Comcast, right? That's really the corporate component about it. It's like, who's signing the checks? As Tracy Morgan used to say on 30 Rock, appropriately NBC. He's like, oh, that's the dude from the checks. That's who signs my checks. It's like, who's signing your checks for these jobs? All right, Jim and Dylan. So first of all, we got thousands of people watching across platforms, especially over on Twitter X. For all the shit that I talk about Twitter X, actually we do pretty well there. So I'm so thankful to all of you for watching the show. Don't listen to me. But we did ask our viewers throughout the last few hours to sound off on the last topic. Jim and Dylan, it is about this kind of proposed ceasefire deal, a potential exchange for hostages. There we go. So, it kind of remains to be seen exactly where things stand and where we're going to go from here. Man, tens of thousands. But Jim, first you, obviously there's this big comment on, who gets credit, by both sides, unfortunately. I mean, the outgoing White House and the incoming White House about this. Jim, how do you see this getting litigated? And are we even asking the wrong question by asking who gets credit?
I wish we weren't asking this question.
The people have spoken, Jim. We have to answer this question.
Maybe in 3 days we won't be talking that much about this, but I will say, perhaps I don't mean to sound trite, but foreign policy is the province of the sitting president. Not the next guy, not the previous guy, the guy who's at the desk right now, today. Yeah, I'm sure I know there was conversation, or we were told there was conversation between the outgoing and incoming diplomatic teams. That's great. Good to hear. Like to hear that cooperation. But come on, foreign policy is the job today, tomorrow, Sunday, Joe Biden. I think that's pretty easy.
Fair enough. Dylan, obviously, you got this perspective here where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was crucial to close the deal, along with Trump's incoming Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. I think that's maybe kind of where the conversation gets muddled. Obviously, the digital bully pulpit that @real Donald Trump has across platforms is one thing. Then you got Biden coming out, taking a little bit I don't want to say really a victory lap, but kind of taking some credit. He had that weird exchange with a reporter. What was he asked? He was asked something like, "Who deserves credit?" He goes, "What do you think?" or something. Whatever. Biden gave.
No,
like
he
a weird
said, "Are you joking? Is that a joke
Oh, are
or
you
something?"
joking?
Yeah. Are you
yeah,
joking?
Yeah, like, is that a joke? And then didn't really, give an answer more on that. Dylan, how do you see this? And more context than just this question and this conversation, Dylan, is the fact that I wonder how often we'll continue to hear things like this. Yeah, Biden's only president for a few more days. But a lot of the CHIPS and Science Act, a lot of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the EV charging stations, a lot of these things that have already been appropriated, money's out the door out of the Biden White House. That stuff's going to be built for the next couple of years. And I will be following closely to see, all right, are those things that Trump kind of takes credit for because they get built while he's president relative to trying to explain to people, well, actually, Democrats and Republicans under Biden are actually the ones who got a lot of that spending done.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to this because I think me and Jim might have agreed too much in the first few segments. I could not disagree more on the ceasefire answer. I think Joe Biden is living in fantasy land if he's going to sleep at night thinking, I just ended this war. This was all me. There's a few pieces of evidence here. One, his State Department spokesperson saying that the Trump administration or the incoming administration was, absolutely critical, were his words, in getting this deal done and coordinating to make sure everybody's on the same page. I think it's also crazy to think that the incoming president, who's a few days from taking office, saying publicly that this deal's only going to get worse. He's negotiating via Twitter, which people laugh at and think is silly. But I think the idea that it had no impact, and knowing that all of these, much more hawkish towards Hamas, much more, consistently pro-Israel officials are about to come into the administration, that didn't have any impact on these negotiations, maybe create some urgency is crazy. And then lastly, Joe Biden has been president for the last 14 months while this conflict has been going on. Do we really believe that all of a sudden in the last few days is when they finally cracked the code to getting a deal done here? That's when it just happened to finally break through. He's been talking out of both sides of his mouth on Israel for the entire, extent of this conflict. It's been, Israel's being too harsh. We're going to consider
nothing makes a gathering great like Eggland's best egg.
More weapons, they get them. So, I think it's kind of crazy to think that, it just happened to happen now. It didn't have anything to do with Trump, and Joe Biden had a foreign policy masterclass putting this deal together. I think he is,
I didn't say a masterclass.
You didn't say that.
I simply said he was the guy sitting at the desk.
You didn't say that. You did say he's the guy at the desk. But I think a lot of people, Biden seems to be very self-confident that he, killed it here and did a great job. So him and his team maybe think it was a masterclass. And I think it's just, one of my favorite movie quotes is from Inglourious Basterds, and the main character, Aldo Rain, he says, if something seems too good to be true, it is. The idea that this broke through a few days before Trump comes into office and it was all Joe Biden seems a little too good to be true for him to leave office on a high note.
So I just real quick, Jim, because I'm out of time, we got to get to our last segment because that's also sponsored by our friends at Public. But Jim, real quick, with an eye on history, any shades here with Carter and Reagan, Iranian hostages, before my time, but it's the first thing I thought of in a historical context. That was Inauguration Day. Even if you got Carter and his administration officials who did, to Dylan's point, clearly do all this work for a long time. It's just a little bit of like, oh, the new guy's here. Okay, great. Now it's time to do the deal.
Yeah. I mean, that was the Iranians were determined to undermine in every possible way and embarrass Jimmy Carter. It was that simple, the foreign policy arena is a little more nuanced these days. I think self-interests probably play a greater role than sheer utter ideology, which is what was ruling the day back then. It was a sad period. We just buried Jimmy Carter. History really has shown him a lot of grace over the years. They were not good days, being a one-term president like that in the midst and to have a crisis like that on your watch that lasted so long. It was bad. It was depressing. And I guess I can say with some degree of happiness that, he lived an incredibly full life, overcame whatever difficulties he experienced in the White House, and history is, holding him up in very good stead.
All right, fair enough. I appreciate the context from both of you guys. Time now for our final segment, and hang around for just a few minutes. And it's a fan favorite one, is that. Dan the Man, hit it.
Say something.
Nice.
The whole studio's mouthing the words and go. So Jim and Dylan, this is what it's all about, the show here in this great time of, or not so great time of heated political divisiveness. I want both of you to say something nice. Jim, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to give Dylan the final word here. Jim, to all those in the great arena of politics with whom you disagree, say something nice, Jim.
Well, I somewhat anticipated this question. This is less about politics, but I'll say something nice anyway. Go watch Argo. Ben Affleck used to make good movies, and he made an incredibly good movie about the Iranian hostage crisis. The movie came out, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that, 12, 15 years ago. It's really good. It's really good. He directed it. He acted in it. There's some great acting in it. Alan Arkin is in it. I think John Goodman might be in it too. Anyway, okay. It's a great movie. Ben Affleck catches a lot of grief these days. Something nice is like Ben Affleck hit it out of the park with Argo. It's really good. It's really good history.
Go. I think did he direct Argo also? He's not just in it. I think he directed it.
He directed it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Jim, I gotta say, we've been doing this segment since we launched the show in September. No one's ever given an answer to this segment quite like that.
Well, you got a movie tip.
But I appreciate it. There we go. Dylan, how about you? Obviously, in this space of divisiveness, I'm looking for something nice about any and all of those who may not see things eye to eye with the way that you do. Dylan, go ahead, man. Give me something nice.
Yeah, unlike Jim, I did not anticipate this question, so I'm a little on the spot here. But I think, the topic today was, is the mainstream media going to survive Trump, and how are they going to change or not change? I think, having met a lot of people that work in the corporate media and mainstream media and, seeing their work, I think, with the Daily Caller, we want people to come subscribe to us and click on our stuff and give us money, not the corporate media. But we're always going to be oppositional to them in some degree. But I do think most of the people working in that space are trying to do the right thing. I think there's a bit of a tendency on the right in particular, people to think that, everybody in corporate media is making mistakes on purpose. They're trying to screw us on purpose. They're lying on purpose. And of course, things like that happens from time to time, and there are bad actors. But I think most of the people working in media are trying to do what they think is the right thing to do, and they're trying to do their jobs well. And even if those of us who are, in independent media or conservative media or whatever think they're not doing a great job of it a lot of the time, I think, the motives, I think, are generally positive, and people mostly want to get to the same place. They just come from very different starting points, and so they don't see eye to eye on it. But I think they're trying their best, and maybe they'll learn some lessons, and things will go better the next 4 years than they did the last 4.
I'll take that. I'm actually going to ask a rare follow-up back to Jim Roberts on this. Jim, is there anything good about Donald Trump? Give me one thing.
Don't let Blue Sky see this, Jim.
Is there anything good about Donald Trump? Well, I'm sure there is.
He's tall, Jim. He's tall. You can give him that one. That's an easy one.
He's a big guy. Listen, he is a big dude. I sent this to my buddies today. He's the same.
I'll say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Determination.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty much left for dead on January 7th of 2021. I mean, politically, and for the better part of that year. And while he may have, said things about running again, I never thought I would see it. And for him to persevere. And he's an old guy. I mean, he's a really old guy. I'm an old guy. He's really old. But for him to have persevered at that age with pretty, healthy odds against him, that's something nice, right?
For sure. And to Dylan's point, that was great. And I appreciate that from both of you guys. To Dylan's point, he's a big guy. Same height, same weight. as Derrick Henry, the running back for the Baltimore Ravens.
Is that the president's doctor's report weight that happened to be 1 pound under the obesity line? I don't know if that's quite the case. I'm not sure.
If not, then he's even bigger than King Henry, and that's really impressive because we got a great slate of NFL games coming up this weekend, fellas, but none better, in my opinion, than watching Baltimore and Buffalo on Sunday night. So if you want to get a sense to Trump's proportions, you watch Derrick Henry, you'll be like, wow, that would be what it's like to hand Donald Trump the ball on 3rd and long. My special thanks to tonight's guests. You guys were absolutely awesome. Knocked it out of the ballpark. You ran for over 100 yards like Derrick Henry himself. That's Jim Roberts, former assistant managing director of New York Times, my former colleague, my former boss, honestly, at Cheddar, contributing editor to the 74, longtime deadhead, a legend through and through, as are you, Dylan Hausman, editor-in-chief at Daily Caller. Hope both of you guys come back to the show soon. My very best to both of you.
All you have to do is ask.
Absolutely. Enjoy the inauguration on Sunday, whether you agree or don't. It is a momentous, historic day for our country. And, of course, we'll be back here with a whole new show the following week to break it all down. Jim and Dylan, thank you, guys.
You bet.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Bangers. They drop bangers tonight. How about our guests? Give it up for our guests tonight. So I also want to shout out, I don't want to say Taylor's the MVP of the show for like the 5 seconds. I think we accidentally had him up on frame, but like, bro, you crushed it. And I'm glad the world got to see Taylor's Florida Panthers ugly sweater as well as that. That was really good. How about our favorite comments of the night? What do we got here? So, well, by the way, so this guy has a comment down here, Andrew Stadelberger. How about Andrew Stadelberger? Give it up for Andrew Stadelberger and the folks over at Player Coach for being here in person tonight in the studio. Look at that go. Taylor for president. The light is clapper. Did I clap? Is that what? I know the light turned off at some point.
Right after.
Was it after a clap?
Right after we win.
Wait, is it? Is it really?
No, it's not.
No, it's not. Oh, man. I was going for it. I was like, wait, I would have learned today. I was today years old when I learned. Okay, so Murph O'Halloran he had some bangers in the comments tonight. You did. Shout out to Murph in San Francisco. Trump only reads the cartoon section. Yeah, that's fair. Also, cartoons about Trump are also really funny. When you had a bad report card, only mom's home, but you're most scared of dad's car pulling into the driveway. Yeah, I think that was with regards to Trump there at the end with Biden. See, for me, mom was the scary one. Mom was like the mom and the dad. So if like mom came home, I was in big trouble. If I had that's why I tried not to have very many bad test scores, because mom was the one who freaked me out. Love this comment. This was tremendous earlier today. Nearly all major media outlets owned by the same few players influence what to report, what not to say, and how to report things. But I will say, most friends of mine in newsrooms, even if they have one of these corporate oligarchic type bosses, the rank and file journalists will tell you, I have never felt, and I believe them sincerely, they'd say, I've never felt pressure to say this or don't say that. I got friends at CNN, they're like, yeah, but Warner Brothers Discovery's never told me I can't do that story. Now, I don't know if it's, that might have changed, but I feel like that's kind of a recurring through line of confidence. So I wish the best to all my friends. Carlos says, Jim Roberts, icon. That's it. That's the tweet. That's the whole thing. I agree. Jim and Dylan were both great. They were great together. I liked that there was so much they had in common, but they had kind of different perspectives on things. And we need to shout out the thousands of viewers we had live across Rumble, X, Twitch. What am I forgetting? YouTube? My God, everyone was awesome. Instagram. We're live on Instagram, too. We have an Instagram account. I also appreciate the hundreds of thousands of people who voted in our poll tonight. That was really special stuff. Also, this one from Murph was a banger. Dylan apart man, not house man. That was in regards to Dylan's comment about his age, not being able to buy this or buy that. It was very funny. But Dylan was a tremendous guest. New presidential, okay, yes. Okay, can we do this right now? Can you guys pull up the new portrait of Trump? It was released today.
How's that?
It's on Twitter. I know it's somewhere. Oh, you got it? Oh, dude, that was, how'd you do that so fast? That was wildly fast. Okay, so yes.
News, baby.
So I love, I think it was the New York Post had a tweet that said, Trump's new presidential portrait is drawing comparisons to his mugshot. I think it was Max Tanny at Semaphores, yeah, because it's the same person. Of course it's going to resemble. That is a strong resemblance. There's something they did with the lighting for these, for him and Vance both, right? It's like a...
very saturated, kind of very hyper... No.
It's a saturated, it's an angled light. It's coming up from the bottom. This is intentional. It's intense and it's intentional, right? That's kind of how I struck. Are we doing this?
Yeah.
Do I look like Donald Trump? We're moving my camera. No, we're back. God, my presidential portrait would be awful, right? I mean, this is like, I get it, But this is the type of thing, though. People are you're gonna see this everywhere. Go to a Trump rally in rural America. This will be on T-shirts. It's already on T-shirts. I guarantee, if we had to go to Etsy or Amazon right now, look up Trump portraits. People are already spinning this off into merch. And I guess that's the official portrait, right? Like, that's going to be like the one. That's the thing. That's wild. Where do we think Trump's presidential library is going to go? Good question, right? Only thought of that because I went to Hyde Park a couple months ago to go see FDR.
Mar-a-Lago.
You think it's Mar-a-Lago? It's Florida. No, you're joking. But I don't think you're the OK Corral. But I don't think you're wrong.
Community college.
I mean, it's not going in. It should go to Queens, where he's born. It's not going to go to Queens. I think you're right. It's going to go to Mar-a-Lago. That is going to be, if we think like the Simi Valley Reagan thing with the fake or the old Air Force One is impressive. Whatever ends up getting built for Trump is going to be the biggest. It's going to have the most gold that any president's ever had. Is like this whole thing. This is a great comment from Common Threads. Join the discussion on all these platforms. Thank you so much for commenting that. Do we live in a pineapple under the sea?
I think we're living in a pineapple.
My special thanks to Taylor, Chris, Alexi, Dan, the whole team here at Common Threads as well. Folks, that's going to do it for today's edition of the show. We'll see you again next time. Enjoy the inauguration on Monday. We'll be back next Thursday at 7. See you then.
Dangers.
Done.